Okay, and here we are. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon, and welcome to today's CHRO SA and Agreed webinar. For those who don't know me, my name is Nick Smith from CHRO South Africa. I'm busy putting a message up in the chat. If everyone could please let us know where you are from and what position you hold within your company. I would like to encourage everyone to please ask as many questions as possible during the session, which we will endeavor to answer in the 15 or so minutes at the end. Please rest assured, if we don't get around to answering all of them in this session, we will ensure that all the questions are answered, and I will send you a personal mail in the coming week with your answer. Okay, let's get going. So it is with great pleasure that I would like to introduce today's guests and speakers. We have Global Future of Work expert, Kelly Palmer, who is the Chief Learning Officer of Degreed and co-author of the book, The Expertise Economy, and joining us all the way from California. Kelly will be outlining how to adapt your learning strategy to employee-led training and prepare for success. We also have Rihanna De Bruin, who is the Group Head of Learning, Governance and Assurance for the Standard Bank Group, who will outline the bank's efforts of developing a learning strategy for the group, which is aligned to their business strategy. It has been great fun working with Kelly and Rihanna and the Degreed team, and the next hour should prove to be very insightful. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kelly. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Nick, and it's really great to be here today. Good afternoon, and it's morning here for me in the US. Hope everybody's doing well. So I wanted to start out today just by giving you a little background. I've actually been in Silicon Valley my whole career, and I actually didn't start out in learning. I actually started out in product development. I moved into corporate strategy, and then I moved into the learning field about 15 years ago. And one of the reasons I tell you that is because I was really surprised, even in the heart of Silicon Valley, that corporate learning seemed a bit antiquated when I first joined. A lot of companies were still doing classroom-based, lecture-based learning and training, and really what they weren't taking advantage of a lot of the technology that was out there. So what I've been doing since I joined the learning field is really focusing on that intersection of where education and technology come together, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I'm going to start by telling you a story of my time. I spent many years at Sun Microsystems, and Sun Microsystems, it's an interesting story. I'm sure that many of you have heard of Sun. They created workstations that ran a lot of the huge companies around the world, including major airlines and the stock market and most of the tech companies. And we were also the inventors of Java. But something happened to Sun along the way during the dot-com bust. We at one point we were at the top of our game, going against companies like IBM and HP and Microsoft, and nobody ever thought anything was going to happen to Sun Microsystems. We had the majority of the market share, and it looked like we would be good for the future. But after the dot-com bust happened, actually Sun did not reinvent itself, and I think we kind of became a little complacent and didn't really go after new market opportunities or see how the landscape was really changing. So Sun started faltering, and at the end, Oracle ended up buying Sun in 2010 for just $2.7 billion, when a few years earlier it had been valued at over $500 billion. So you can see how quickly that downfall of Sun Microsystems was. And this photo I'm showing you now is the logo where I commuted to work for many, many years. And this is actually on the back of someone else's signage today. I often, when I do this in person, I ask people, does anyone know what company is on the other side of that logo? And it turns out that it's Facebook. And Facebook intentionally left Sun's logo on the other side of their signage to remind their employees of what can happen to a company that doesn't reinvent themselves, that doesn't go after new market opportunities. And so that's their message to employees, which I think is quite interesting to keep reminding. And Sun's story, although it's very near and dear to my heart, is actually not that unique. Actually, we know that 50% of the S&P 500 companies will be replaced over the next 10 years. And, we can see that is even being compounded now with the pandemic that's going worldwide. Companies are having to figure out how do they think about market conditions and how do they reinvent themselves. So one of the studies that I like to quote most often is this: PwC does a global survey for CEOs every year. And the reason I like this study so much is it shows people, HR, learning, and business professionals, what's on top of mind for most CEOs. And in 2018, when PwC put together this survey, they actually found that the availability of key skills was the number 5 issue on their list. They felt like that was a huge threat. In 2019, that actually moved up to number 3. And so what this means is that CEOs and business leaders are paying much more attention to what skills people have in their company, and therefore an upskilling or learning strategy, than they ever have before. So why is that? And the main reason that companies are so worried that their employees don't have the skills that they need, that if people don't have the right skills, companies are not able to innovate effectively, and they're also not able to go after new market opportunities. And these are things that are really, really important. So one of the things that's impacting how we think about learning and work, and we talk about this in the expertise economy, are the trends that are going on in the workforce. And the 3 major trends are around automation, digitization, and acceleration. And we call this, the 4th industrial revolution. And the reason that this revolution is happening differently than others is that in past revolutions that we've gone through in the workplace or in the industry, we've had time to adjust to the changes that are going on. But in the 4th industrial revolution, it's happening now, and people are having to adjust every day. And we've seen that especially be true over the last few months. So work and jobs are fundamentally changing in this new world of work where these trends are happening. So if we look at a few of the ways jobs and work are changing, the first has to do with the length of a career. For the book, I interviewed Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott. They're professors at the London School of Business, and they talk about the fact that people are living longer, and oftentimes they're working longer, sometimes because they want to, but other times because they have to, because of financial reasons. So that means that there are older demographics in the workforce that maybe we haven't been paying enough attention to. Excuse me. The second trend is this idea of tenure in a job. And what we've heard is that the average time that somebody spends in a job is around 4.5 years. And even when I was at Sun Microsystems, I did a variety of roles, but it tended to be, around 4.5 years each one. So it doesn't mean that you can't be at the same company for longer, but oftentimes people change roles within companies. In Silicon Valley and for millennials, that's actually more like 2 years rather than 4.5 years. And I've seen that firsthand. Especially when I was chief learning officer at LinkedIn, we had about 70% millennials, and we would see that they were looking for new opportunities after 2 years. The next thing is about the half-life of a skill. So what do I mean by that? And that really is that, if you learn a skill today, in 5 years, that skill will become obsolete. And again, for technology skills, that actually is more like a 2-year span, and for some technologies, maybe even shorter. So I think we have this amazing opportunity right now to reimagine human work. And as we see things becoming more automated and AI becoming part of our regular work routine, we're going to have to reimagine what humans do at work. And instead of being focused on routine-based work or process-based work, we're going to be focused on creating more value. Will free us up to do, since machines will be doing the routine work, it frees us up to create more value. So a lot of times when I'm speaking, people often ask, so what are the most important skills of the future? And although we know future skills are a bit hard to predict, I do have a list of some of the skills that are in most demand. And I've got those in two categories. One is actually, the first column is what I like to call power skills. Often people call those soft skills, but I think that's not quite powerful enough for how important these skills are. Some of the examples of these skills are emotional intelligence and empathy, which we've seen a lot, again, over the past few months, communication and collaboration, creativity. Those are going to be the skills that are transferable and most in demand moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean that technical skills aren't also going to be very important. We know that blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and data analytics, I don't care what field you're in, data analytics and being able to really understand data, get insights from that data, and tell a story is really, really important. But I'd say that if there's, that also in the learning industry, roles and skills are changing. When I started the learning organization at LinkedIn, when I was the CLO there, one of the things that I got to do was I got to create a learning organization from the ground up. And what was exciting about that is that I could kind of reimagine what the future of learning would be like. And instead of hiring traditional instructional designers, I actually started hiring people like learning experience designers. Now I see that being more common, but back when I started at LinkedIn, I don't think a lot of people had heard of that role. Content curators, another big role that we're seeing a lot of learning and HR groups turn to. I'd say marketing and storytelling is huge. And then I've got, there's so much technology out there, having somebody that's really understands the learning technology. And then of course, data analysts are big to tell the learning story and to understand what people are learning and how they're learning. But I'd say if there's one skill that may be most important, it's learning agility. And what do I mean by learning agility? And that's the curiosity and the motivation to continuously learn and build skills throughout the entirety of your careers. No longer can you really go to school for 4 years in higher education and think that that will last you for your entire career. I know that kids coming out of university now, they're finding that they have to learn new skills immediately on the job, and that will be true for them throughout their careers. So, the message that, we have for both companies and individuals is that if you're not ready to learn every day and keep up with this rapidly changing world, neither individuals nor companies can really stay competitive. And I think companies are relying on employees to really take initiative and to think about keep learning new skills all the time. We did a study degreed with Harvard Business Publishing last year. And one of the things that we learned from the study is that people were learning from a variety of sources all the time. And I think it's interesting to note, this just verifies what we already know. A lot of people in the work world would go home and say, look, when I want to learn something at home, what do? I watch a YouTube video, or I watch a TED Talk, or I listen to a podcast or whatever, but they are not getting that same learning experience at work. And there's no reason why they shouldn't. This is how people learn every day. And I think for the learning industry, we need to understand that this is what we need to be providing at work as well. And now we know that, learning content is everywhere. And the fact is that people can learn almost anything from any device anywhere in the world for low or no cost. And these are just some of the content providers that are out there. But when we look at the data, from Degreed of how our customers are using data, and even at Degreed, when I look as the chief learning officer of what content people are consuming most, it's all of this kind of content that's what they need when they need it. And so I think that that's a very interesting point. The other thing that we learned from that study is a lot of people said, look, I'm really excited about learning and I really want to do that, but I need a little bit of guidance from my manager or from my company. And I think that, we need to move away from this command and control idea that we're always telling people what to learn and when to learn it. But what we can do instead is actually give people some guidance saying, these are like what I just gave you as an example as a learning leader. These are the skills that are going to be most important for the learning or HR organization moving forward. Or these are the skills that I think are really important for us given this time, or for the company as a whole. So I think that that's a good point. Now, when we move into talking about upskilling, because we've heard a lot about that recently, we've seen, at least in the US, and I'm sure this is around the world, that a lot of companies have decided that they are investing huge amounts of money into upskilling their workforce. I think that the first announcement was from Amazon, and they committed $700 million to upskilling their workforce, and a lot of times for jobs that won't even be at Amazon in the future. And the latest that I saw was PwC, who's actually investing $3 billion in upskilling the workforce. So this is not a time to skimp on investments for skills, because it's so critical to the future of companies moving forward. Those companies that put an upskilling strategy in place and investments around that are going to find that they are well positioned to recover or to keep going once things get back to semi-normal. So how do I define upskilling? And upskilling is this idea of investing in employees' continuous learning, identifying and filling skill gaps for your employees, and really helping people stay employable. I think that's a really key point. So I'm excited. One of the other things that I realized as I got into the learning field is that there's two kinds of learning organizations. One is more of a service organization where they say, look, I'm here to support the business, and a lot of times people will come and say, this is the learning that I need, and learning organizations will design and develop and deliver that learning. I argue that learning shouldn't be seen as a service, but rather we should see learning as a business strategy. Really understand where the business is going and have that learning strategy or skill strategy be part of the business strategy, not something separate. So if you think of learning as a business strategy, it's about creating a skills strategy, and that means what skills do your employees have, what do they need, excuse me. Understanding your content strategy, like are you creating all of your own content? Are you partnering with other content providers? What technology are you going to use to help with this strategy? Really understanding data and analytics, how you're going to get that data and how you're going to analyze it. Because one of the most important things is to be able to share insights and tell the skills story, market what's happening in the company so people understand, and that really creates a learning culture. So I think our other guest, Rihanna, is going to dive a little bit deeper into how a company is actually creating learning as a business strategy. And then I think you ask yourself these, three questions. From a CEO perspective, do we have the skills we need to win? And really they want to know, do our employees have the skills? And business leaders should be asking, for my organization, what skills do we need? What skills do we have? How do we help people fill those skill gaps? And as an employee, you should be asking that of yourself. Do I have the skills that I need to be successful moving forward in my job and in my career, to get better at what I do today and to get ready for the future? So to cap it off, it's really, I think, this strategy and how Degreed, can really help you. Technology can really help create an intelligent and dynamic way to upskill and reskill. Sure, you can do a lot of these things manually, but if you have technology that can really help you integrate all of these components, I think that that's really impactful. So understanding the skills your business needs, measuring the skills your workforce has now, helping people develop those new skills, and then helping people actually connect those skills to new projects and opportunities. That's what a larger vision of HR and learning should be. So really, we're talking about supply and demand. There's people who have skills, there's people who need skills. And so this is the vision of the future. How do we actually match up that within your company so you can have an internal mobility and an internal career marketplace strategy? So we can really lead the way, in reskilling the workforce. And I think this community of HR, people, business leaders, and learning leaders can really lead the way in reskilling the workforce. This is our opportunity. CEOs are paying attention. So imagine your future workforce, more skilled, more engaged, people really creating more value. And then what companies get out of that is, as we looked at the beginning, they want to increase growth, innovation, and value creation. And so creating learning as a business strategy can really help you accomplish all of this. And then I'd just like to end by saying we did just publish a white paper on the 7 steps for upskilling your workforce. And if you're interested, you can go on, I think we might be sharing a link. And if not, you can access this on the Degreed website and download the white paper. You can also contact me separately and follow me at kelly@degreed.com or link in with me on LinkedIn. And so with that, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I think we're going to have questions a little later on, but I'm going to turn it back over to Nick. Thanks, Nick.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kelly. Yes, we will be putting up that white paper for download on the CHRO.co.za website. So that will be available. We'll make that available from tomorrow. I'm just going to stop that. We'll be running, just before we get over to Rihanna, I just want to run a quick poll, which you will see coming up in the chat in just a second. That poll is: at what stage is your company's learning strategy? 1, it hasn't started yet. 2, it is in planning stage. 3, it is at execution stage. And 4, fully implemented and functioning. After Rihanna's presentation, we will see the results of this, and then we will ask Kelly or Rihanna for some comments. Okay, we will now hand over to Rihanna. I'm just going to start her presentation. And Rihanna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you very much, Kelly. A lot of things to ponder in that presentation. And also there's a little bit of comfort that I get from it, thinking, that I'm happy to present today, because I think that at Standard Bank we're on the right track. So a little bit about myself. I've been in some form of adult learning and education for 20 plus years. I'm very passionate about education. I'm very passionate about learning. I'm passionate about what it can do in terms of people and the transformative power thereof. I have been at the bank, at Standard Bank, for just short of 9 years, the longest that I've ever worked for any organization. But interesting to say that 2 of the roles that I have had since I've started there did actually not even exist when I joined the bank. And one of the key reasons why I am at the bank and why I love being at the bank is that people really are at the heart of everything that we do at Standard Bank. So for those who have joined us from outside of South Africa, my Gen Z people said to me in preparation, please don't share anything that people can Google or find on social media. But I thought I'll just share with you very quickly around Standard Bank. You can see we've been around for a while. Interestingly enough, our head office is in South Africa. But we operate across 28 countries, 20 of those in sub-Saharan Africa, 48% shareholding in South Africa, 52 internationally, with a very strategic partnership with ICBC, who for the 2nd year in a row have been named the top bank in the world. So that's just a bit of background. Let us get to the meat of the discussion for the day. So I'm very fortunate to work for an organization that has a very well articulated strategy. It's very clear, it's very simple to understand, and as you can see, one can easily display it on a page with a very clear purpose statement, vision statement, key strategic drivers, and key strategic focus areas. So I'm quite sure that if you were to talk to anybody in Standard Bank and you ask them what is the purpose of Standard Bank, they will say immediately, Africa is our home, we drive her growth. This strategy was very carefully developed and has been very well circulated and cascaded throughout the organization. So when we started to think about how do we craft our learning strategy, we went in and we looked at what this business strategy looked like. And as I say, it was quite easy to understand and unpack it. And they then went and looked at the group human capital strategy. So in Standard Bank, you have your learning rolling up into human capital, and that might be common for most organizations, and then into the business. And human capital had actually done quite a lot of the heavy lifting for us already. So in looking at our strategy, we had to go and look at what human capital had already done, how they had unpacked the business strategy for themselves to be sure that we could drive alignment against that. So we looked at how they defined their purpose statement, how they said what success looks like, their key focus areas, which is basically the goals that they will be focusing on, and then again, their approach. So now that we had all this information available to us, we came together, we formed a small work stream, and we started from a discussion around what we aim to achieve in terms of our outcomes. And we kind of put these in parentheses to say, what is the conversation that we want people to have in the organization about learning? So if you're an employee in the bank, what do you want to say about how learning shows up for you? What kind of learning opportunities do you have in the bank? What career advancement can you do through learning? And then from a business perspective, how is learning partnering with you? How are they helping you to drive your business strategy? How do we create value? Once we had done that and we felt comfortable that we understood what we wanted to achieve, we then said, well, now we need to look at what we need to focus on, similarly to what they did in human capital. And you could kind of cluster it into 3 buckets, if I can explain it like that. And the first one was to say, what is it that we want to achieve? In other words, in this value that we want to create for our business, in this value we want to create for our employees, what do we want to do? And here we focused on things like creating personalized learning journeys, making learning relevant for people, creating great learning experiences, offering opportunities for people in terms of mobility. And really the focus here is on how we help our people to protect themselves in a world that is constantly changing. Also interesting to mention here that in human capital and across the bank, we really are in pursuit of helping people and the people in the bank to be the best version of themselves. And learning, we believe, plays quite a significant role in achieving that. Then what we did was we said, all right, so if we know what we want to achieve and we really want to create all these experiences for our people and enable the learning, what do we need to do from a learning function in terms of how we organize ourselves to deliver this? And key here was that we knew we had to align to the group architecture, which at the time when we started this conversation in itself was also going through some change. I'm sure this will not be too unfamiliar with people, but when we started to look later on at what was happening in the organization across the countries and in the business lines, we found people doing the same things in learning, but being called different things. We found duplication, we found overlap. And so we realized that there was quite a bit of work that we needed to do in this space. And then the last cluster was then to say, if this is what we want to do for our people and we're going to organize ourselves in this fashion and build this capability in learning, what are these tools that we need to help us accelerate the delivery of our learning? And linking up to what Kelly was saying, here there was a strong focus on what does this mean for the digitization of learning in the organization, and also a strong focus on data and the insights that this provides us so that we understand our learner better and that we can also track it back into our HE strategy and into our business strategy. Lastly, having done all of this, we then looked at the approach, and we were very clear that when we do all of this and we execute against this, in order to be effective as a learning function, as a learning organization, we need to be deliberate in how we approach learning. We need to do this in partnership with human capital because we are part of the human capital value chain. We need to have an innovative mindset, bring about disruption, bring about change, but do it in a way that's constructive, deliver with commercial rigor, and be sure that we have the required capability in our learning function to be able to drive this strategic plan forward. So once we had this strategy and we had clearly articulated it, we then took it to the Learning Stratco, and after that to HE Stratco. It was very well received. We received a green light, and that meant that we could now go into execution. I'm not going to take you through everything in terms of what we did here. That's far too much, and we'll be here for the rest of the afternoon. But suffice to say, these things did not necessarily happen in sequence the way that I've put them here, but these were just some of the things that we looked at. The first thing was we decided that learning can, with this great strategy that we had developed, learning can no longer look like it used to look. And we did quite a lot of research to try and understand what the learning organization of the future will look like. And at the center team, we decided on 4 key areas, 4 key functions, being experience, adoption, governance, and innovation. We also at that time agreed that when we develop roles against these, that we wanted to the name of that role to be clear in terms of what that role is about, so that it doesn't require too much explanation. So we have learning experience designers, we have learning adoption architect, learning governance, and learning innovation architect. For all of these, for these 4 functions, we created JDs, we role descriptors, we identified the skills required for each of these. And so this was kind of our first step in starting to land our strategy, was to start to build a learning structure that is reflective of what we believe the future of learning should look like. We also then started to work on our operating model. Again, we were very fortunate that the bank had already developed a very strong and very clear operating model that we could adapt and adopt. And this is something that you will see throughout all our countries and through our business lines. There's a very strong common theme that you can see the business strategy and operating model reflected in all of the countries and the business lines. From a governance structure perspective, one often hears learning talking about, we are order takers, we're not seeing as strategic partners. Well, one of the ways to become a strategic partner, to become part of your decision-making framework in your organization, is to put structures in place that are clearly mandated. So we've always had a Stratco, we've always had a Manco, but now we recreated them, recrafted them, properly mandated them, and put them into the governance structure of human capital. And this immediately starts to shift the conversation, and has shifted the conversation for us and put us now part of the kind of official decision-making framework in the organization. So having looked at that, how do you then not only operationalize your strategy, but how do you then bring your strategy to action? So once we had identified the strategy, once we had developed it, we had signed off on it, we started to interrogate it in more detail, and we defined some strategic projects out of that. These are just a few that I've listed here, and I don't want to go into them in too much detail, but suffice to say, learning automation is definitely one of those projects, which is about the acceleration of the digitization of learning. The bank has a very strong digitization focus. We're all about always on, and we're appreciative that people, must be able to learn whenever they want, at any time, at any place, on any kind of device. Also, in terms of future skills, this is a work stream that has really made incredible progress, because we know this is the kind of thing that keep people awake at night. Chief executives, human capital, keep people awake, even employees awake, in terms of, do we have the right skills for the organization for now and into the foreseeable future? Do we know which skills are expiring? Do we know which skills are emerging? And will we be ready at that time when that happens? So in this work stream, for example, we've developed quite a strong future skills framework. We have been able to identify for the bank what those skills are. We've assigned SMEs and learning partners to drive that forward. So this is all emanated from our learning strategy. So key strategic projects, very important. We've also put metrics in place against this. So when the bank, of course, defined its strategy, it had metrics that it had identified, the same for human capital. And these metrics we have adopted into learning, and we run them also against these projects. So I thought it might be worthwhile, and I have gone through this quite rapidly now, but to maybe just sit for a moment and reflect on some of the lessons that we learned in this process. How did we get to this place where we now have a very proper learning strategy, where we are proactive in terms of our people, proactive in terms of development of our people, proactive in helping people to be the best version of themselves, and potentially, making our chief executive sleep a little bit easier at night, particularly when it comes to our people. So that what we did was we ran this as a project. So we had a proper project manager in place who did our scheduling, who diarized our meetings for us, who ensured that we kept momentum in setting up our learning strategy. And this was very important. This was not a person from learning, but a person out of our human capital project management office. Next thing that I learned is you've got to be very clear on your intent. Why are you doing this? Why are you creating this learning strategy? For us, we have a business strategy that is a live document. It is something that we carry with us. We live it. And so when we developed, and the same can be said for our human capital strategy. So when we developed our learning strategy, it was with the intention that we have a live document, something that will live with us, something we can, that has buy-in, something we can clearly articulate, communicate, cascade, etc. in the organization. If you're not clear on this, you don't really know why you do it, it's a compliance thing, well, then you can go copy and paste something off the internet and replace your company name and put it in there. The next thing to this is that you have to prepare. So we did a lot of research. We looked at what was happening inside of the organization. We looked at what our EMPS was doing. We looked at what's happening externally to the environment. We checked in with our suppliers to say, what are you seeing in the world out there? And then engagement. Building a learning strategy is not something you do off the side of your desk or you do it on your own. It is not something you craft in 24 hours. It is something, if you want it to have meaning and you want to have clear with the purpose for why you are doing this, you need to do it in a consultative manner, collaborate, and communicate constantly about it. This is very important. Also, test your thinking throughout. Find people that you can play it back to. Also, people who are not from learning, people who are from the business, so that you can check, is this really what we need to be doing? Is this properly aligned to the business? Will this deliver the impact and add the value that we want it to do? And then don't rush it. It will take as long as it takes. Give yourself proper time to do this properly. And you might wonder why I say don't lose it in the end. Too often, what happens when we have great ideas and we do these things is that at the end, when we now think we've got this product and it's really just about the approval, it gets hijacked because we didn't honor the necessary governance processes in the organization. We didn't do our stakeholder mapping well up front. We didn't respect the structures. We didn't want to jump the hoops and hurdles and all of that. And really, this is also why I'm saying don't rush it. It will take as long as it takes, but be sure that when you develop this, that you are very aware and cognizant of the things that could potentially derail it at the very end, because you really don't want that to happen. So having now shared all of that with you, how does one actually know that your strategy is a good strategy and that it's landing? Well, of course, you've got your projects that you can monitor yourself against, and that's great. But you know what? Like our head of human capital often says, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And look at all that we've been able to achieve in this time of disruption. All of these were key strategic projects that were lined up way before we even knew about the coronavirus, and COVID became, a daily topic of discussion. So part of our automation and digitization strategy of how we accelerate access to learning was to implement a learning experience platform. We were in a POC for about 18 months with Degreed when we made the decision to go live enterprise-wide for the organization. And because of this disruption that we had with COVID, we actually had to move this forward by 2 months. But there was never a conversation about not moving ahead with this. We also rebranded learning into a My Learning construct. We landed our people promise, which is all about how we value the people in the bank, what we want to do for our people, how we see them, how we view them, but similarly also saying how we need our people to show up for us. We also landed Salesforce, and in the midst of all of this, the bank rebranded with a new payoff line around It Can Be, which is all about dreaming, thinking about the art of the possible, thinking about where you want to be and what you want to do in the world. So all of these projects, we could have put a stop to. We could have said, this is not the right time. We can't have big launches. Everything has to be done virtually. This is not what our people want to focus on right now. But because this was sitting in our strategy, because this was well thought through, and because we didn't want to disrupt our strategic implementation and where we're going as a bank, that hasn't changed course. We still went ahead and we landed all of these key strategic projects. So in summary, I really hope that in a very quick way, I've given you a sense of how we went about it. I think in some instances it looks quite textbook, but honestly, this journey took us probably about 12 to 18 months to complete it. And it's still not, it's not completed. It will never be complete. It's an iterative process. Your projects change along the way. Your priorities of your projects change along the way. And it's ongoing. But I hope that I've been able to give you some insight into how this could work in an organization. And this is really our attempt at making sure that the 158 years that we've been around count in our favor, and doesn't mean that we've now reached our expiry date or put us on that list, as Kelly said, of the 50% of top 500 Fortune 500 companies who won't be here in the next 10 years. So I'm going to stop there. And then in terms of COVID, one actually can't talk these days much if you don't mention it. One of the questions that we get asked a lot, is when we return to normal, when will this be, when will that be? And recently I saw something from one of my favorite authors, and I thought that I'll just end with this, that the virus invited us to design a new future. And this is certainly also how we are looking at it from a Standard Bank perspective. And with that, I thank you for your time. And thank you again for the opportunity to share with you a little bit of our journey at Standard Bank.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much for that, Rihanna. I just want to, let me just stop that. On to the poll. I'm just going to give a couple more seconds in case anyone hasn't answered the poll question as of yet. And then I will publish. Okay, the numbers aren't changing. So, I don't know if the poll if the results have popped up on the chat. Doesn't seem so. Okay, so we asked, at what stage is your company's learning strategy? 16% answered it hasn't started it yet. 28% say in the planning stage. 30% say at execution stage, and 23% say fully implemented and functioning. So it seems like obviously the majority of them is either in planning or at execution stage. Kelly, your thoughts on that poll?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear where people are in terms of thinking about your company's learning strategy, and it's quite an even distribution across the board. I'd say in planning and execution stage, it looks like it's about equal, but this is actually very encouraging. I would say that that only 16% have not started yet, but I'm sure even those 16% are thinking about, how do I create a learning strategy, or how do I think about creating an advanced upskilling strategy? And hopefully what Rihanna has shared with you today gives you some insight into how one company actually did that. And love the sharing. It was a great presentation, Rihanna.
Right, thank you. Kelly, I was sort of, as you were talking, I was wondering, you mentioned the Sun Microsystems, a company that didn't really have to reinvent themselves. Can you give an example of a company that is doing this really well and what we can learn from them?
Absolutely. And in fact, interestingly enough, I spent many years at Sun, and one of our biggest rivals at the time, for many, many years was Microsoft, right? Because we competed in both software and hardware. And if you look at where Microsoft is now, they're one of the top 5, tech companies of the world. And they're a great example of a company that has truly reinvented themselves, but not just from a product perspective, also from a cultural perspective. For those of you who don't know the story, it's really fascinating. Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, actually, when he took over, said, look, we need to completely change our culture there. And he hired Carol Dweck, who wrote a book called Mindset. And what he wanted is that Microsoft was a very competitive culture, and also kind of a know-it-all culture. So his message to all employees was, we want you to all be learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. He said, I'm a new CEO, and there are still things that I need to learn, which gave, I think, his executives and all of his employees this idea that it's okay to be learning all the time, every day, and that you shouldn't go into a meeting just expecting that you should know everything. And that's a huge shift. They're on this journey, and they're going through this cultural journey. And so, we didn't touch a lot on learning culture today, but every really successful strategy around learning has to incorporate, building a learning culture at your company, and how you help people think about learning as just part of what they do every day.
Okay. And any major challenges they face?
Well, I think it depends on where you start off, I think, with your culture. So some, in the book, we talk about 4 stages of a learning culture. And I'd say that, a lot of companies start with compliance if they do nothing else. Then they move up to necessary training around tools and processes and how to do your job. The next phase is moving up to more strategic initiatives. And then lastly, to this continuous learning culture. And I think that that's where most companies strive to be. And so the challenge would be is really identify where you are on that spectrum, and then figure out what do you need to do. Like if you're only at level 1 or 2, how do you start thinking about moving up, and so I'd say the challenges have to do with, where are you starting and where are you trying to go and what are the steps there. I think the other thing I wanted to mention in terms of challenges, and Rihanna mentioned it earlier, is that this is an ongoing iterative process. This is not about creating a strategy, launching it, and then hoping that everything's just going to go great. A learning strategy needs to be alive, as Rihanna mentioned, alive and well, and you need to actually market it. You need to tell people what's happening and remind them that, this learning is available and you should be focusing on building new skills. So I think the communication, the engagement, and realizing that this is an ongoing process is really key. And I think once companies realize that, they have less of a challenge of keeping it going. So.
Okay, thank you. I think Deborah in the chat also says it quite nicely that creating a learning culture starts at the top. Giving permission to your employees to engage in ongoing learning is key. So
if I can make a comment around that, yes, it can start from the top. If you are at a company where your CEO or your business leaders are talking about learning, like Satya Nadella, like I've had at Degreed or at LinkedIn, great, you're well off. But what if you're at a company that doesn't start from the top? You have the power to do it from the bottoms up too, through groups and communities and getting people going. So I'd say it's a top down and a bottoms up approach. So just not to get people discouraged if their leaders aren't already there and aren't doing it from the top down. It doesn't mean that all is lost. You can actually still drive it.
Fantastic. So there is still hope.
Yes.
Right. Thanks, Kelly. Rihanna, I wanted to touch you. You did touch base right at the end on COVID-19 and what we're all facing. But how has your learning strategy changed, if at all, since COVID?
Yeah, so our strategy hasn't really changed since COVID. What has changed is the prioritization of the projects that we defined out of the strategy. So the business strategy hasn't changed, the human capital strategy hasn't changed, and ours hasn't changed. But the projects that we identified from that strategy has had to be re-looked at and reprioritized. So in terms of some of the automation things, if you think about a simple example like automating parking arrangements for people when they come for learning. I know it sounds quite silly, but that's something that you would now no longer prioritize because people are not coming to a facility for parking to be arranged. So it's that kind of thing. So we had to relook. Your future skills suddenly became very important. We had to accelerate on the digitization of our learning. So our learning experience platform that was scheduled to be landed and launched later in the year, we moved that up by 2 months. So we brought that forward quite a lot. And instead of then, kind of launching when you have everything perfectly in place, we had to just land and kind of work it from there onwards. And that's the kind of thing that we had to do. So we in that digitization space, moving away from classroom training. So we stopped all classroom training on the 16th of March. And not, so now you're not saying we're not going to build personalized learning journeys. We're not going to create learning experiences for people. We're no longer going to focus on skills and talent management and leadership development. But what you are saying is we're going to have to do that quite differently. So the strategy still stays the same in terms of how we want to develop our people and what we want to do with them, but how we execute against that strategy, that's what changed. And a big thing for us, what changed was the acceleration of digitization and then access to data and to see what was actually happening. And those were some of the things that we had to prioritize and move more resources into.
Okay. So were those your major challenges with regards to the implementation?
Yes, and communications. So again, it was very important for us to land this strategy well in all countries and business lines. And we fortunately had the opportunity last year to do that. I'm not exactly sure what that would have looked like if we had to drop that this year, but we had the opportunity to do that cascade last year. So this year, when people started the year, they were very clear on what our focus is, where we are going. And in a way, the strategy is what's kept us going, being honest and keeping kind of stay on course. Because if you go into a crisis like this, it's very easy to derail, to not know, where do I prioritize, where do I put my attention, what do I need to do next, what comes first, what comes last. But your strategy kind of helps you just with that direction. It becomes kind of your true north, your North Star of where you want to go. But then again, how you execute against that, what you prioritize, that's where we saw the change.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Rihanna, we had a question from Susie Madhu. I hope I pronounced that surname correctly. She asked, Rihanna, how do you personalize learning?
So that's a very good question. I actually saw the question in the chat and I thought, I hope we scanned past that. But you personalize learning by changing from what we used to have in the old days, from a very strong push of learning to a pull from learning. And this is where the learning experience platform becomes so important, because what you do now is you create an access point for people to go and explore across, as Kelly showed in her presentation, multiple platforms and sources of learning. And so what you do here, personalized, is you create access to learning for people. So you take away the barriers to learning, and in that way it becomes personal. So what we've done is there's no longer this thing about, this is what you know, this is what you don't know, here's the gap, this is what you need to do. or to say it's instructive and directive from the business. We now do learning in a way that if you want to do flower arrangement, you can do it. If you want to become an actor, you can do that. So whatever it is, here is a channel, here is access to learning opportunities. And in that way, it then becomes far more personalized than this thing that gets pushed down from an organizational agenda to become also say, let's meet one another, by also saying you can push your own personal agenda in terms of your development.
Okay, perfect. So I think that kind of leads in quite nicely to Peter's question. He says, what incentives can be put in place to drive cultural change? Either of the two of you?
You know, this is an interesting question. And I'm not sure about the cultural change, and I'm kind of looking at the question here. I do want to say something, though, that in Standard Bank, what we did was we separated learning from leadership. And in the leadership portfolio, we also joined it up with culture. And so we've tried to build a very strong culture for learning in the organization, and also a very strong focus on leadership getting involved in learning and building that culture for learning in the organization. We're not really so much about incentive in a monetary perspective, as much as we about enticing. How do you entice people to learn? I don't want to pay people, incentivize them to learn. You must have a growth mindset. You must be excited about learning. You must see the opportunities that comes from development. It must be driven from yourself, and your organization must be creating a culture where you can do that. And that's what we try to do. We create a culture for you. We create access to learning for you. But then it is about you having to have your own internal driver that says, I want to embrace it. So what we can do is we can remove all the obstacles of access to learning, and we can create excitement around it, and we can show you the benefits of it. But it really is about the individual. Like I said in my very first slide, it really is about, I can bring you there and I can show you all about it. But it's really for you whether you want to take that on or not. So we don't really have a culture of incentivizing learning.
And I think I would add to that incentives, I agree with you. I don't think monetary incentives are the way to go, because we want people to intrinsically want to learn. But a couple of the things that I've learned along the way is that it makes a huge difference if your manager or if your business leaders are talking about learning. Like if your CEO has never talked about learning before, and then all of a sudden says to the entire company, hey, I just read this amazing book last week and I'd love to recommend it to everybody. How many people would think, oh, wow, that's learning? It is learning. Or here's a video I want to share. One of the things that Degree does is allow people to share the content with others that they're learning, and then you can follow others and see what they're learning. So that's one thing, how you can start to incentivize and create kind of this learning culture. It's kind of recognizing the fact that people are learning. So if somebody's learning something, you can call them out and say, hey, so-and-so's, been learning this and that, and you can recognize them for that. Then the second thing is about managers. I think if managers realize and keep talking about the importance of it, and also modeling that behavior, and they have the discussion around saying, what did you, even in staff meetings about what people are learning and how they're changing their behavior, those can be some less monetary incentives, I think, to help people realize it's okay to be learning, and this is encouraged here at this company.
So to add to what Kelly is saying, one of the things that we did at the bank and what we see getting quite traction is what we call the gift of time. So there's certain units and certain areas where they actually give their people a gift of time, where they can book time out of their diary on a Wednesday afternoon, a Thursday, Friday afternoon for 2 hours, no meetings. They don't have to say where they are or whatever, and they can use that time for learning, for innovating, for thinking, on their personal development. So really it is, and I want to say this, Kelly is so right. We've just landed Salesforce in the bank. And I mean, our chief executive is at the head of that leaderboard, constantly communicating about, have you been out there? Have you tried this? How far are you? And that is how we are building this culture of learning in the organization. It is so critical, that participation from executive level.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, ladies, thank you so much for your time. We'll be wrapping up now. Just on a final note from my side, that's what we had today. And again, thank you, Rihanna and Kelly. Next week, please join us for next week, where we, on the CHRO South Africa side, we discuss executive remuneration in 2020. We have Professor Shirley Zinn, Leslie Yule, Director of Deloitte, and Matimba, the CHRO of Vodacom, discussing this quite a topic. So please join us next week. You can visit our events at chro.co.za/events. And lastly, there was a question from someone saying, will these slides be shared? Yes, so within the next hour, you'll all receive a recording of this presentation, and we will also have the white paper, Kelly's white paper, up on chro.co.za, as well as the slides. So everybody, thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Rihanna. And have a great afternoon. Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.